It's great to be here. It's fun to do these. So what I want to talk about today is a talk that I've done a bunch of times, but I've sort of changed the middle piece of it based on some of the stuff we're doing now in generative AI. So this is like 50% the kind of classic Schwartz Connects workshop that I've done for years here, and they keep asking me to come back and give it. So theoretically, it's helpful for you all. And then the middle part is a little bit different. And it builds on the talk that Dave Mawhinney did on the Lean Startup. So this image was kind of the essence of Dave's talk, right? So if you remember Dave's talk, the point was you spend a certain amount of time building things, a certain amount of time measuring customers' reaction to what you built, and a certain amount of time learning based on those measurements that you did, right? And obviously the whole talk is good. If you did not see it, it's on YouTube, so I'd encourage you to go and watch it. This does build on it, but if you weren't here, it's no problem. The point I think that's important though about this, so I love this visual. I think this visual is super helpful. It's the right way for entrepreneurs to think about these things. There is a challenge with this visual though, which is that it kind of implies that you spend a third of your time building, a third of your time measuring, and a third of your time learning. But like we all know, like that's not actually how your time gets spent in a startup, especially at the early stages, right? If you just think about each of the startups that each of you are involved in building right now, on a percent of effort basis, right? You're going to spend way more time in the building activity than in the measuring and learning activity. And that becomes important because entrepreneurs think in build, measure, learn cycles. But the truth is the rest of the world thinks in terms of calendars, not build, measure, learn cycles. By the rest of the world, I mean those people called customers that you sign up to work with. They're not concerned on how many build, measure, learn cycles is it going to take to get this next feature out. They want to know, like, what date is this going to be available to me? It also may mean things like your significant other or your parents, right? They're not actually concerned about how many more build, measure, learn cycles do you have until we actually start making money instead of spending money. I always say, like, being an entrepreneur is great. Like when you're an entrepreneur, you go from signing the back of the check to the front of the check. And your significant others are going to want to know, like, when do I get back to signing the back of the check again? And they want to know that not in terms of build, measure, learn cycles. They want to know that in terms of actual months. Like, how many months are we going to be using savings to pay for rent instead of the revenue, right? And so this becomes important because you need to translate these build, measure, learn cycles into sort of calendar time. And so the essence of this talk has not changed, which is I want to by the end of the talk answer two questions. One, what do we build? Right? So if building is where a lot of the time goes, getting good at picking what you spend your time building is really important. And then two, how do we actually translate this from build, measure, learn cycles to calendar time? Right. So Ed is here from PPG, not to like pick on people in the audience, but Ed is here from PPG, right? If Ed does a project with you, right, and 3 months before the project is supposed to be delivered, you call Ed up and you say, hey, we're in a situation where this is taking longer than I thought. We either need to reduce the scope a little bit or get a little bit more time. 3 months ahead of time, you can have a really good conversation about the trade-off between those two options. If you call Ed up the night before he's supposed to go talk to his boss about the thing that you're working on and say, I need to either give you less tomorrow or I need another 2 weeks, that's not going to be a healthy conversation, right? Even beyond the whole like personal part of this, you got to get good at predicting, which means you got to get good at picking what to build and then how long it's going to take you to build. And so let's talk about this first question first, which is like the what do you build part of this, right? And so again, this is straight from, I mean, the slide is not straight from Dave's talk, but the text was on the slide that that Dave gave you, with the only exception being the bracketed words or service. Everything else is plagiarized directly from Dave's slides. And the reason for that is in both cases, we're quoting directly out of Eric's book, right? So what do you build? Well, you build the version of a product that allows you to learn as much as you can about customers with as little work as possible. So we're for a few minutes here, we're going to leave aside the question of how long does it take you to build it. We're going to say we'll come back to that later, and we're just going to be focused on this what do we build question. And the what do you build is, okay, what can I do to learn as much as I can about my customers with as little work as possible. Now, I added the bracketed word or service because one of the things that I've observed is often this thing is not a product at all, right? And so I think people, they start to sort of move down a sort of incorrect path where they're thinking about this as a product, and it's got to be a product. And I'll tell you, like, the symptom of this, right, is like people will say like, oh, I need to do this, you know, I need to raise $250,000 to build an MVP, right? So you remember this, right? So in Dave's talk, he calls this MVP. He makes a sports analogy and moves on. I will say, like, right up front, I think there are some very ubiquitous mistakes about MVPs, 5 of them. And so, like, honestly, to this essence of like, what do you build? Like, if you just make sure you don't make these 5 mistakes, you're on a pretty good path to building the right things. We'll give you some examples in a little bit, but let's talk about these mistakes first. So to set up the first one, I want to tell you about a trip I took to Portugal, to Lisbon, Portugal. So I used to be part of this group called Silicon Valley Goes to Europe. It was, but like, I wasn't from Silicon Valley, but the Kauffman Foundation sent a bunch of American tech entrepreneurs to Europe, and you had to go to like 2 cities across the trip. And actually, he was a former Fulbright scholar here. Was a friend of mine who was back living in Lisbon. And so my deal with the Kauffman Foundation is I was always happy to go as long as Lisbon was one of the 2 cities, right? So like, I pick Lisbon, you pick the other city, I'll go every year for you. And what you did is you did a bunch of like talks like this in front of large audiences. And then you also would do office hours. Office hours are awesome, right? Because the concept of office hours is entrepreneurs come in, you got 20 minutes with them. And it turns out no matter how good or bad an idea is, you can always do a 20-minute meeting with an entrepreneur. Like, it's like, so it's great. So just a bunch of these 20-minute meetings back to back. But on this trip to Lisbon, I had about 3 hours of office hours, and I was about halfway through, and it really pushed the limits of like, well, how awkward can these meetings be? So the entrepreneurs sit down with me and they say, it was 2 guys, and they had both just gotten married, and their wives were best friends. So their wives had been like the maid or matron of honor in their respective weddings. And you know, one of the things I think that's magical about entrepreneurs is that entrepreneurs, they tend to like walk around the world seeing things and like, oh, that's not like it could be. Let me make it better by being an entrepreneur. I think I'll fix this problem in the world with my startup. Well, they had just gotten married, and so they sat down with me, and the first thing they said to me was, marriage is broken. That was literally the first words out of their mouth. I was like, man, 20 minutes, maybe too much time. Like, I'm thinking in my head, like, I don't know what the second sentence is, but when the opening sentence is marriage is broken, this could get super awkward super quickly. So to try to preempt it, I was like, I should just tell you, like, I'm super happily married. Marrying my wife was like one of the best things that ever happened. So Hallie knows her. It is kind of a miracle that she married me. Like, it, like, literally, like, I married way above what I should. And she is so I was trying to like really like reframe, like, and they're, oh no, being married is great, but the process of getting married is broken. So a small weird anecdote about me is we actually sold our first startup. That transaction closed 7 days before I got married. So I actually have no idea about what getting married is like not. Turns out my wife and my mother and my mother-in-law did all of that. I remember I was flying home from San Francisco in the middle of this diligence because the company was based in New York, but the people who were championing the deal were in Berkeley, California. So I was taking a red eye home one night, and as I was flying home, I thought to myself, like, the wedding, it'll be fine. I'll be home for the wedding. I might miss the rehearsal dinner, but I'll definitely be home for the wedding. And I, like, in a somewhat hazy moment, came off the plane, sat down with my wife, or not my wife, then my fiance, for breakfast. I think, hey, good news, Jen. Like, I may miss the rehearsal dinner, but I would definitely not miss the wedding. She was less excited about this good news that I was, but the point is, like, I have no idea about getting married, but I'll tell you the story they told me, and I've told this story hundreds of times, and people tend to get it. So the process of, they said that, look, here's the thing about getting married. Your fiance comes home, you both had a really long day, and she says to you, we have a really important decision to make tonight. And you're trying to be like a good fiance. So you're like tired, really just want to drink a beer, but it's like, okay, let's have this serious conversation. And then she says to you, do you think we should have beige or off-white tissue paper in the invitation? And they said, Sean, the problem with this is that beige and off-white are the same color. Right. And so you say something like, I don't care. And then they hear you don't care about, like, how many kids you're gonna have. And next thing you know, so we're gonna build software to fix the process of getting married. Now, again, I actually have no intuition if this is a good or a bad idea, because I have no context on what getting married is all about. But I think kind of interesting idea. And these guys, I should tell you, were Eric Ries fanatics, right? They had the Lean Startup book with them. They'd, like, pages highlighted, Post-it sticking out of it. I think they slept with the book underneath their pillow, so, like, by osmosis, they could learn more about it. So I said, like, well, what MVP did you build? And like, oh, we built a landing page, which is a classic approach, right? You build 2 pages, they look similar, you drive traffic to both of them, you see which features drive higher conversions. And so they explain the 2 features. So the secret is, often when people do this with me, I know which landing page will convert better because I've just done this long enough that I have pretty good intuition. I had no intuition. I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, which one converted better? And they were like, oh, nobody signed up. It's like, nobody signed up? Yeah, nobody signed up. I was like, doesn't make sense. Like, I'll tell you, this is true. Like, we could right now, we could stop this talk. We could build a landing page that says, I am a Somalian prince. Please give me your social security number. And if we send enough Facebook traffic to that page, somebody would fill it out. Like, the internet is a magical place. People will do things that you just cannot believe. So nobody never signs up. I'm like, well, they probably forgot to test the page. So, like, let's pull it up and look at it. And as soon as they pull the page up, I don't need to test the page, because they called it a landing page, but it was really 4 pages long, white background, black Times New Roman 12-point font, pages of text about what the thing did. And not so much like why you would care about it, just literally what the thing did, with like a circa 1999 web form at the bottom, you know, like an unstyled gray submit button with some text boxes. And I said to them, like, do you remember the conversation about the beige versus off-white? And this is where you got to love entrepreneurs. You can't make these parts of it up. He literally goes to, like, scroll to 3 pages down where he talks about the algorithm he uses to help you pick colors. And I'm like, no, first of all, that's a feature, not a benefit, but we are way away. Like, that is not the thing we need to be focused on right now. I said, would your wife want a tool that looks like this to be associated with her wedding? And, like, the color drained from these guys' face, because they had made the first mistake of the 5 mistakes about MVPs, which is viable does not mean crappy, right? Way too many people think they're building MVPs and they're actually building crappy, minimally crappy products. And the truth of the matter is that you don't need to run an experiment to figure out people don't like crappy software. I'll save you the time. 100% of people do not like using crappy software. This is not sort of enterprise software in the late 90s. Like at this point, people expect software to look good, work good. So what you're really trying to do is not build a minimally viable product, right? What you're actually trying to build is a minimally awesome product. What's the minimum amount of thing that you can build in an awesome way so that you can learn a lot about your customers, right? It also turns out that that acronym now actually makes sense. So it's fun, and Dave does a magical job doing the whole sports MVP analogy, but it's actually not an MVP, right? What it actually is it's a map, right? It's a map of where you're going. And each time you go through one of those build, measure, learn cycles, you should have a better sense where you're heading. This not a destination thing also means that you are not raising however much money you're raising, but we'll just pick a number. You're not raising $500,000 to build an MVP, right? You're raising $500,000 to build a bunch of MAPs that will help you learn a bunch of things about your business, because you're going to go through that build, measure, learn cycle over and over again so that you know more about where you're heading so that you can raise a lot more money at a lot higher valuation, right? It's not a destination, it's a map, right? And you can do things like this. This is just kind of a quick, it's not, don't get hung up on the text, but you can do things here where you can look at how each time you go through one of these MAPs, you're figuring out like, okay, what is it? How does the customer interact with it? What are you hoping to learn? And how much money does it cost to build it? And you should be able to like answer that question each time you go through the build, measure, learn cycle. And what you do next is driven by what you learned the time before, and you can kind of keep track of these as you move along. Right, and each time you go through one of these, it should validate or invalidate key hypotheses. Right, if you remember Dave's talk, the key hypothesis is, do any customers want this? Right, so a key hypothesis is not, can I build it? It's, do people care? Right, it doesn't have to be a product at all. And it's not always the landing page. This last one is really just for CMU people. Like not really, but it's kind of a funny way to, like, we love data here at Carnegie Mellon. We would love it. Talking to people, a little unnerving. Analyzing a bunch of data, we're there for it all day, every day. So it turns out landing pages are fun for Carnegie Mellon entrepreneurs because you can generate a ton of data and then have a bunch of fun time analyzing. And that is one good approach, but it is certainly not always the right approach. You have to be careful about that. So in addition to landing pages, some other things that you can build. You can build storyboards, you can do videos, Wizard of Oz. So storyboards, the concept behind a storyboard, right? Low fidelity sketch. And this is important. It's a low fidelity sketch that shows what you're doing before, during, and after using the product or service. People often think about storyboards in the context of like, oh, this is like a movie storyboard. Like I'm telling the story of my product. No, what you're doing is you're showing a customer right before you use my product, this is what you'll be doing. While you're using my product, this is how you're doing it. And after finishing using my product, this is how you finish up, right? So, you know, this is a terrible idea. Do not start this company. But just to make it really obvious, really quick, let's imagine that you have an idea to create a photo sharing app called Tartangram. And right, it's an intentionally bad idea. And what it does is you take a picture and it adds a CMU filter to it and it lets you share it out. Okay, the storyboard is you look out, you see something you want to take a picture of, you pull your phone out and you take the picture. That's the before. The during is I add the Carnegie Mellon branding and tint to it, and the after is I share it to my other social network, right? So you want to show people that before, during, and after. This is not like the advertisement for Tartangram. this is before, during, after the actual product that you're imagining. I kind of already made this point with the whole Portuguese entrepreneur story, but I will tell you, like, when you think about high performing landing pages, you should mentally be going through each of these different questions when you look at it. Are you talking about it from the perspective of the user? Is it short, right? It shouldn't be landing pages. It should be, 20 words max. Everything on the page, this is less of a problem for what it's worth for traditional entrepreneurs. It's a much bigger problem for corporate entrepreneurs. Corporate entrepreneurs love to put these landing pages on website templates that have lots of other links. So you go to company XYZ's landing page, and then you can click off to the home page, to the about me. Well, the problem is now you don't actually know what percentage of the people who saw the page actually were interested in what you showed them, because you lost the traffic before they submitted. So the only thing you should be able to do before you hit submit is submit your information. Now, after you submit your information, you should be able to share it, because it does turn out sometimes the experiments that you'll run, the conversion rate will be about the same for both of them, but one will end up having people share to their social networks, that kind of thing, and one will not, which you can think of as sort of an extra vote for one of the two conversions. By measurable, the point here is just like, make sure you instrument your pages correctly to actually keep track of who's submitting and who's not, and then consistent. This is actually one that's easy to stub your toe on. I've done it. I mean, I do this all the time still, and I did this like a year ago recently again. So you'll want the landing page to have some kind of stock photography image on it, right? Like, you're not going to want it to be just a page full of text. One of the things that's really hard to do is to get two images or to get an image that works for both page. Right, so say you have value proposition A and value proposition B, and you want a stock photo image that works for both value propositions. It will be tempting to just do two different stock photo images that will match the two different value propositions. The problem is, anybody who spent time in advertising will be able to tell you the photo will drive more, there will be photos that will convert better or worse. So you may end up just running an experiment, which is which stock photo is better, not which value proposition is better. It does turn out, like, recently, some of the different tools that allow you, like DALL-E, that allow you to create images through generative AI are actually allow you to do this much more carefully, because now you can actually develop a stock photo image that works for both landing pages. So you're guaranteed to have consistent results there. But that's just historically been a place you can stub your toe. Sometimes it's just a video. This is like the canonical example here, because it turns out when Drew was talking to people about Dropbox, right, people would be like, oh yeah, I'm familiar with that. That's like Yahoo file sharing. It's like, no, it's nothing like Yahoo. Yeah, no, you upload files and then you can download them onto, that's the same thing. It's like, no, it's completely, but people had a hard time understanding what he was picturing. So he literally used Camtasia. It's a funny video, like, he does a good job making it viral. So, but he used Camtasia to basically create a video to show the value that he was imagining. Now, remember, for every MVP or MAP, you want to know how the customer should interact with it and what you're hoping to learn. The customer interaction was actually not video plays or anything like that. It was people who had emailed him at this email address, and then the interaction back and forth after that. Right. So remember, like, sometimes it's a little nuanced. Remember, I said for each MVP, you should say, how does the customer interact with it? What are you hoping to learn? Sometimes it's a little bit nuanced what the answer to that is. But that is effective. And then the last thing is the sort of manual prototypes or Wizard of Oz or whatever you want to call it. These are really, really helpful for a lot of AI systems. Like, you have a human do the work that you'll later have a system do. So, it's like, fill out this form and our intelligent system will do something. Well, the intelligent system for the first, 100 of them might literally be just an email to your team to manually do the work. It's a great way, though, to see what people's behavior actually will be. Okay, so we're about 30 minutes in. That part of the talk has been what I've done for a long time. This next little section is a little bit newer, and it kind of relates to the Gen AI fellowship. Before we get to like the how do you measure, I think there's another thing that's really important to point out, which is the art of entrepreneurship in some ways is figuring out how you can do this faster and faster and faster. And if you look over the last 20 years at the evolution of entrepreneurship, I think the reason entrepreneurship success rates have gone up in aggregate, and there are more options for entrepreneurs today than there were 20 years ago, is a function of two things. And I'm telling you, like, for what it's worth, before I get into the two reasons, like this space right here is a good example of how different entrepreneurship is. So the old Schwartz Center was in Posner Hall, the sort of old building, and it was basically impossible to get to. Allison, is that fair? Like literally, there were two. So Posner Hall is a weird building. Only at Carnegie Mellon do we build buildings like this. We basically stuck two buildings together and called it a building. But that meant that the upper floors you could only get to from one of the two elevators. So like if you went to the second floor on the wrong elevator and you were trying to get to the other second floor, the way that you would get there is you'd go back down to the first floor to go across to go back up to the right. So our old entrepreneurship center was in kind of the back part of one of the two back sections of Posner Hall. Like it was kind of maybe I was going to say intentionally hidden. Maybe it was intentionally, maybe it wasn't, but it was a hidden part, right? We are not that, like, this is arguably the nicest or the second nicest space in the nicest building on campus, right? Like entrepreneurship is just different today. And there's a bunch of reasons for that, but I think there's two things that have made it sort of rational for it to be different. One, guys like Eric Ries and Steve Blank, and a little bit some of the stuff that I've had the privilege to do as well. Like we've standardized vocabulary when we talk about entrepreneurship. Right. So it turns out, like before Eric wrote his book, people still built MVPs. They didn't call them MVPs, but people built MVPs. People still iterated on their idea. We didn't have a term called pivot, but we absolutely iterated on ideas, right? But we gave vocabulary. And what that means is, like, if I'm having a conversation with you about your business, we can do it much faster because when I say MVP, you and I both know what we mean. So that's one reason. The second reason, though, is it's gotten way faster to do a lot of this stuff, right? So when I started with Dave and a couple other guys, the second startup that we did, we had to like buy servers, like actual servers, not like buy Amazon credits. Like I'm talking the things that Amazon credits run on top of, we bought those. And we had data centers in two different cities where those servers lived. And we actually had to like literally like put them into the rack and power them and remotely monitor and manage them, right? It was a 7-figure expense of servers to get started. That's before we processed the first piece of content on those servers. Years later, we would sell that business to LinkedIn. We owned 0 servers. We had a $500 a month credit card bill, and we processed over 1 million content items a day from across the web. Like this is not just a technology change. This is a complete change in how you capitalize these businesses. But the real point as it relates to this is it got way faster and orders of magnitude less expensive to do this. And what happens is when that happens, this has happened a number of times in entrepreneurship over the last 20 years, but the most notable of those would be in the kind of 2005, 2006, 2007 time period. So 2005, Ruby on Rails came out, right? And in 2023, that feels relatively boring, but I'm telling you, when that came out, it was magical because all of a sudden it was like, wait a minute, all the commodity stuff that these web applications do, I can just download a gem and have it do it instead of writing yet another version of that commodity application. 2006, Amazon Web Services came out. totally magical thing. We already kind of talked about that. 2007, this came out, right? I had a meeting 2 weeks ago with a student here. I won't say who it was. And he was complaining about the 30% that Apple and Google take. Okay, this is going to sound like an old man statement. I am getting older. We were just talking. I am getting older. But I'm telling you, if I had gotten Verizon to let me keep 70% of the revenue for a mobile app that they were distributing, people would have thought I was the best negotiator in the world. Like you were hoping for 30-70 the other way. You were hoping to keep 30% of the revenue. And you have to do things like guarantee them 7 figures of commitment to get distribution, right? So Ruby on Rails, AWS, iPhone, and mobile app distribution. All 3 of those changed this considerably. I mean, like I'm saying this and you're not in your head, but I'm telling you way more than you understand. Like it changed how you built these things. So think about what happened right after that, right? Well, right around that time, Y Combinator and Techstars started. Why did they start? Well, they started because all of a sudden, $25,000 or $50,000 let you do a lot of this. So now I don't need to send you to Sand Hill Road to spend 3 months going up and down the road trying to raise a couple $1 million with a pitch deck and a business plan. But I can instead invest $25,000 or $50,000, have you do a couple of these build, measure, learn cycles, and you can get a lot further. Okay. So the point is, every once in a while, it's like, wow, I can't just get 5% or 10% faster. It's like I can get an order of magnitude or multiple orders of magnitude faster. And the punchline here is like, we're at that moment again in 2023. Like, see, I want to talk about this more than I have time to talk about this. Like the point is, this is going to completely, generative AI is going to completely change how you build these startups in the same way that cloud computing, Ruby, right? So, and I actually think I was up in Boston the last 2 days and gave a talk for 2 or 3 groups up there, where I basically make the claim that like generative AI is the killer app, or innovation is the killer app of generative AI. Right. So everybody goes to these chatbot, these chat GPT, whatever, and they're like, wow, this is absolutely magical. But like the uses are sort of spiky, right? It works sometimes, it doesn't work sometimes. And I think it's a function of like what you're doing generative AI, right? So when you think about machine learning historically, and generative AI is machine learning, but if you think about sort of, for lack of a better term, I don't like this, but I have not come up with a better term yet, sort of classic machine learning, i.e. what we would have taught you machine learning was 16, 18 months ago, right? The output of machine learning at that point would tell you, well 95% of what you do in machine learning is either a prediction, right? It's a number predicting something. So sort of think of it as like super sophisticated regression, right? It's a classification, right? Either binary or multi-classification, right? Or it might be more unstructured. It might be like just clustering the data, right? Like a year and a half ago, someone came to me with a machine learning solution. It was doing like the verb that product was doing was one of those 3 things: predicting, classifying, or clustering. There were 5% that were edge cases, but that was like all of it, right? So today, almost everything you see is Gen AI. So like it's none of those 3 things, right? But what's the verb that generative AI is doing? Right? It's creating. It's creating text. It's creating images and videos. It's creating specialized instructions, right? But the verb is to create. Okay, well, in a business setting then, just like the killer apps for classical machine learning, and again, I hate that because like that implies we're not going to keep doing that kind of machine. Like there's still a lot of low-hanging fruit around predicting, classifying, and clustering. But the killer apps in machine learning historically were business functions where you had to predict, classify, or cluster. Right? The killer app in 2023 around Gen AI machine learning is going to be creating. And so that means R&D, like in a big corporate setting, that means R&D, that means marketing, I mean certain parts of sales, right? Because these are functions that do a lot of creating. As it relates to entrepreneurs, though, the point is all the stuff you're doing is creating. And everything you see up here, I've spent time with at least a couple startups using generative AI to help them do it 10x faster, right? So come up with a really good idea, validate that really good idea, scale it up. If we had like hours, it would be fun to go through like all of these. We don't have hours. We've got 18 minutes. So I'm just going to pick one, brainstorming, right? So I would just say before I get into this, the one danger with picking brainstorming is it's one of two ways that Gen AI accelerates this. So generally the way I encourage entrepreneurs to think about generative AI is think about it as a co-founder, right? Think of it as not the CEO, but another co-founder on your team. So you should put a hand task off to them to do rough drafts that the management team can review, or they should be adding new perspectives. The brainstorming is really just the second part of that, the adding new perspectives. A lot of these other things would be like the get rough drafts, but again, we don't have time to do. So you just have to kind of trust me that like it works in both of these ways. For what it's worth, these bullets here are true for any time you're trying to use generative AI to do knowledge work. But what I want to walk through now is how do you articulate this in a brainstorming setting? But it doesn't matter. If you're thinking about using generative AI for the work that you're doing, you need to make sure you have the right kind of prompts, you've decomposed the task correctly, and you've properly integrated external data and external systems, right? So I'll go brainstorming through each of these. So first of all, like on one level, it's literally just like a brainstorming buddy. So this is the founder of Box. He's a good follow on Twitter if you're kind of curious about how to use Gen AI well. But when we think about using it as a brainstorming buddy, like people tend to like miss what does a good prompt look like. So this is something that I think like if I were in charge of how we taught generative AI at Carnegie Mellon, which I am not, but if I were, everybody would learn this taxonomy. This was developed by a couple of professors in the South, and the taxonomy is called Teller, which is a acronym. Like honestly, like, and the slides are available afterwards. This whole paper is worth reading. Like this whole paper is like 20 minutes of reading, and like you'll learn. It's not that technical. Everybody can read. But the point is, one of the elements in the taxonomy is level of detail, and it's kind of the most important for this first proper prompt. And just like most of these, start kind of at level 0, and you get to level 5, and as you move along, you get more and more detailed. The point is, when you get to a really sophisticated prompt, so if the prompt is important to you, it's got to do 4 things to be a level 5 prompt. It's got to give a descriptive of the high level goal, a detailed bulleted sublist of the task you want to accomplish, tell it how to evaluate the output, and then give it some guidelines or examples to give you a sense on like how it's doing. So the kind of few shot learning element of this. I would love to spend like an hour on this. We don't have an hour to spend on this, but read the paper if you're interested. Let's think about it though in the context of brainstorming, right? So you can say like, like a level 1 prompt might be like, give me an idea for a startup. And for what it's worth, even a level 1 prompt, give me an idea for a startup. Some of you may have seen some colleagues over at Wharton that taught an entrepreneurship class there. They literally went to ChatGPT and said, give me some ideas for a startup. And they evaluated those startups and so they compared 100 startups from their MBA students at Wharton with 200 startup ideas from ChatGPT. And the ChatGPT ideas were 8 of the 10 best ideas were from ChatGPT based on like a peer evaluation, and like we're like 3 times as likely on an idea by idea basis. Now, to be fair, those are Wharton MBAs. We would expect Tupper MBAs to kick their butt, right? So I'm sure we would do better than ChatGPT here still. But the point is like, it's now better than University of Pennsylvania. That should be scary here. That means in 5 to 10 years, they'll be, I'm just kidding. No, but so like even just that level prompt, but the point is like, if you do a really good prompt, you're going to crush that, right? So profile, skills, and experience, right? You're kind of walking through. So like, this is the prompt that you're giving, right? Walking through each of these different things. In the interest of time, I won't read the prompt to you because Allison's going to send you the slides afterwards, but you get a sense on like how you can get more detailed here, right? But that's just the first point. That's just this concept of like proper prompting. Where this gets really interesting is when you start thinking about those 2 other things that I said. So the next interesting example of this is proper decomposition, right? And the concept behind proper decomposition is like, can I actually break this task down into a bunch of good substeps, and chain them together, right? So most of you are familiar with like tools like LangChain, right? It makes it really easy to chain these things together. Okay, this is so there's a famous innovation framework called TRIZ. TRIZ was invented by a patent examiner like 60 years ago. And what he claims is that all the patents he reviewed, the innovation was doing one of 40 things. So the innovation approach is basically to say, like, I've got a problem, I've got 40 lenses I can apply to that problem. One of these will be, if there's an opportunity to innovate this product, one of these 40 will work. In some parts of the world, like, this is super popular. Like Samsung has trained 500 people on using TRIZ, and they literally have floors in an office building of people doing TRIZ all day. I tried it once in one class. The challenge is like, it tends to be mentally exhausting. Like, it's hard to like just stay sharp to do for it. And people are good at like, oh, I know how to like, bounce to the right ones and stuff, but it doesn't really work. It turns out like this is a perfect thing for a large language model. Build 40 prompts with examples of each of those good lenses, take a prompt detail, feed it in, come out with 40 different ideas, have some filtering criteria, and pick the 5 best ideas based on that criteria, and then review those 5 ideas. This works like magical. Like, it's absolutely incredible. And so this is Flowwise. This is basically just a no-code tool on top of LangChain. The reason is, and this is going to be shocking to this room, it turns out when you talk to people not at Carnegie Mellon and you show them a Jupyter notebook, their eyes glaze over. I know. It's really surprising. But I'm telling you, it's true. Like, outside of Carnegie Mellon, nobody actually wants to look at your Python code. This becomes like a helpful way for them to understand what you're doing. Right? But the point is, like, you can kind of decompose it that way. To give one example of what we mean by proper integration, the other test we did on brainstorming is take a technical journal, extract capabilities out of that. So you can imagine every time the next robotics journal publishes, you read meaning the LLM, reads all of those articles, builds a list of capabilities, compares that against the voice of customer repository, basically does pairwise all of those. So you say, like, I've got 7 new capabilities, I've got 50 problems I'm interested in. So now I've got 350 things permutations I need to test. Has some, again, filtering mechanism, and sends the best ideas out. Right? So the point is not, and that's what it looks like. The point is not like, oh, that's the right thing for you to do. The point is, like, if you're going to use Gen AI, you want to think about proper prompts, proper decomposition of tasks, and proper integration of systems. And the bigger point is, all of these things and many other, I mean, this is just like what we come up with in a couple of months. all of these things you can do like an order of magnitude or more faster, right? And so the big argument here is as you get to this build, measure, learn cycle, we're about to have that next step function improvement in productivity, which is fun because when that happens, then everything gets shaken out. That's when you think about new funding models. So you think about new methodologies. So like as an example, imagine an accelerator that instead of you coming in with an idea, said like, hey, come in with like a neighborhood of ideas you're interested in. And so for the first month, all you do is use generative AI to build every day a different experiment that you want to do to get smarter on the market, to figure out the right zip code and then idea to focus on. And then another 2 months of kind of building it out faster. You'd be further along at the end of that than if you came in with a good idea today using traditional approaches, right? So I'm not saying that's what will end up happening, but the point is like, when you change the speed at which you can get through that build part of the build, measure, learn cycle, because remember, 80% of the energy goes to the build part of that, all of a sudden, you have a whole new kind of unlock of capabilities that you can do around it. The last point, though, is we do need to kind of fulfill the final commitment here, which is we were also going to show you how to tie this back to calendar time, right? Because remember, your boyfriend or girlfriend doesn't care how many build, measure, learn cycles you have. They care how many months till you start to sign the back of the check, not the front of the check again. And the point is here, some type of agile approach to managing the work you're doing against the build part of that process becomes really important. And I mean agile, like in the actual definition of the word agile, like we, meaning business people, like the building you're in right here, have ruined the term agile, right? We use agile and we mean fast. So it's like, oh, I'm doing agile HR. You're doing agile HR. What? How are you? I just want like, how are you doing these things over these things in HR? Like, it's magical. Like, I would love, right? But it just means fast HR. Like, we're terrible. Business folks are terrible. Anyways, my favorite example of this would be Scrum. It doesn't have to be Scrum, but some kind of agile wrapper around that build activity becomes really helpful, right? So you've like got a list of things you want to do, you pull them off, and what you see is like the essence of this is you get pretty good at calculating this number. And when you're good at calculating this number, then you can start to translate the things you need to build, the number of build, measure, learn cycles you have, into the amount of time it's going to take, right? Because you're always forward estimating and you're looking at the aggregate decrease in those forward estimates. And then to the point I made at the beginning about calling Ed 3 months ahead of time instead of the night before, right? You can figure out way ahead of time, like, am I just going to miss? You can have that conversation here, not the night before, right? And you can look across sprints and you can say like, oh, okay, that's cool. Like I have a sense how much I can get done each sprint, how much work remains. I've got about 4 more months till I'm going to be through this build, measure, learn cycle that I need to get to reach the next milestone in my business, right? So the point is like some type of agile wrapper where you have a concept of velocity becomes helpful. I think Scrum is really good. I will tell you, typically in the earliest stages, like you don't actually need to do a daily stand-up. Like, you know, there's 2 of you, you're talking 7 times a day. You probably don't need to ask them, what have you done since the last time we had a stand-up? Because you probably talked to them 6 times. Over time, you'll want to do that. But otherwise, it becomes a pretty helpful thing. And again, it gives you this understanding of how many calories are going to go here, and then how many more of these you need to do before you hit that milestone. So my challenge to all of you guys is, right, get better at predicting this, get better at picking what you want to build, and then think about this new technology revolution that we're all enjoying here at Carnegie Mellon as a way to do this kind of work 10 times faster.